All right, so thanks again, Todd, for joining us. The first question I have for you is, what led you to get into the fire and or fuels management field?
Well, I like to say that I probably started in fire when I was 7 and got caught playing with matches. And my dad found me and I was disciplined. But really, to get in my career in fire and fuels, I actually didn't discover fire until after I got out of college. And I went to Western Washington University and studied environmental science. I knew I wanted to do something outside and with the environment. And while I was in college, I did my college internship down at Lassen Volcanic National Park in interpretation. So it wasn't in fire at all. But I did kind of hear and see some of the fire crews around, and that was back in 1992. And then, so I guess I kind of started to know fire then. And then I went back to college and I graduated in December of 1992. And then after graduation, I didn't have anything to do. And so I went back down to Lassen Volcanic National Park because my girlfriend, now wife, and I both worked down there for our internships. And that was just a place that we wanted to go. And we liked the town of Mineral. My grandparents had a cabin that we could stay in down there. And so we went back down there, and like all good college graduates, we worked in the concessions, folding t-shirts and flipping hamburgers. But it kind of led us into a career with the Park Service. Quinn was able to get a permanent job in interpretation at the front desk. I started bartending in the little saloon there in Mineral, a town of 90. And then the next spring, so the spring of 1994, I had been applying for Park Service jobs. And I accepted a job in maintenance, taking care of a campground. But then the fire management officer at the time, Ken Castro, he saw me, we were living in park housing, and he asked if I was still interested in being considered for a fire position. And I said, yeah. And so I started working on seasonally on the fire engine, and quickly got bit by the fire bug, is how we like to say it. But really more is that Lassen Park at that time, Ken was a very progressive FMO. He had come up at the Grand Canyon, using a lot of prescribed burning. Back then it was prescribed natural fire or fire use in terms of managing naturally caused fires and on the landscape. And he wanted to ramp up the program there at Lassen. And so while it was fun to be on the engine, I got kind of bored, and I quickly globbed on to my interest in prescribed fire and using fire as a resource management tool and a restoration tool, and really started to learn a lot about the impacts of fire exclusion within fire dependent ecosystems. And so I very quickly got over into prescribed fire and fuels, and pretty much stayed there for the majority of my career. So
that's awesome. Thank you. So in that path, as you stayed there, what did that look like as you started to move up in your leadership positions to get to where you are now?
It's I know it's a little different now than it was back in the 90s, but I was lucky enough to get my foot in the door there at Lassen at the time that the program was growing. And so I spent a couple seasons on the engine, and then a prescribed fire monitor position came open. I was able to move into that, stay in that for a few years. And then we started up a fuels crew, and I was able to just kind of naturally progress. And I got that fuels crew together and supervised that crew And that got me through the 90s. And then in 2000, I was able to take a promotion up to Crater Lake as a prescribed fire specialist. And then the National Fire Plan came about in after 2000, 2001. I was able to get a permanent job out at Rocky Mountain National Park in 2001. I was there for a little while, and then a lot of different jobs are opening up, and able to come back here to Western Washington at Olympic National Park. And I was at Olympic for almost 20 years before coming over to Fish and Wildlife just last year, just about a year ago now. So, and during that time, from the time that I was at Rocky, I was for about 15 years, I was a fuels specialist, and, assistant FMO in fuels mainly. So I really focused on a lot of the fuels projects, prescribed burning. I did follow my interest in fire behavior and kind of followed the progression to get to be a fire behavior analyst, long-term analyst, and then for decision support, strategic operational planner, which back in the day used to be a fire use manager. So anyway, that's kind of the track that I took. During that time, it is interesting because a lot of fire is built on suppression qualifications or operational qualifications. And so you do have to get those in place. And just like an example, I had to get work up to division supervisor in order to become a fire behavior analyst. Even though my interest was more in the analyst role, I liked operations, but I was never the running around on. I did detail on a hotshot crew and go out on type 2 crews and fire modules, prescribed fire modules and fire use modules. So you have to balance all that, but then also, especially if you like the prescribed fire and fuel side, look for opportunities. Training. I took fire effects training a long time ago. It used to be called RX-80. Remember the old FMH plots? I know, Heather, when we were talking last month or a couple months ago, it was the NPS fire effects monitoring system. But then there's just a lot of good prescribed fire courses: RX 310, 410, 510, fire management and ecosystems. I was able to get involved with a lot of interdisciplinary teams, research studies using prescribed fire and helping, line out all that. So anyway, kind of in a roundabout way, that all kind of led me to where I am now. And I'm currently, for Fish and Wildlife, I'm the regional fire management specialist in prescribed fire and fuels. So,
awesome.
Fun.
So you did your schooling before getting involved in this as a field. I'm curious if you found that the schooling that you had participated in environmental science, how did that serve you as you started to work in this job?
It's kind of funny because during the first part of my career, it didn't seem like it. It was like, well, I have a 4-year degree. That's that. And it will help because there was a lot of positive education positions, and it helped, on applications and everything else. But once I became an AFMO and I started working on fire management plans and working with interdisciplinary teams, and writing environmental assessments and everything, that brought my schooling back to the table. And, after graduating, there was a lot of stuff in school that I was like, well, I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. And then lo and behold, I came back around and I was doing a lot of that stuff. So, you might not think you're going to use it, but, 4 years of college, it helps develop your critical thinking, your understanding of the connections between uh, and working with people and everything else. So
Yeah.
all in all, I found it very beneficial, and I'm glad that I went to school.
Awesome. All right. So what do you enjoy about your work, the job that you do? What do you enjoy about it?
Well, my new job, I like working with people, and Region 1 in Fish and Wildlife it's a large region. It's all of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Hawaii. And then when I first started this job, for the first 6 months, I was taking care of Region 8, which is California and Nevada. So it was a huge chunk of ground, and I was going around and just trying to get my mind wrapped around fish and wildlife, because after 28 years in the Park Service, I had been to almost every park unit there was or is. And but I was learning over the last year. I've been learning a lot about fish and wildlife and visiting refuges, and it was a little bit of a different organization and setup. Much is smaller than the Park Service, which is something that I liked about it. But really, it's all about helping to use fire as a resource management tool to meet the land management missions and meet the objectives for restoration projects and healthy ecosystems. And so over the years, when I was at Olympic, a lot of people don't think Olympic is they don't think of it as a fire mecca of the world, and it's not. But it was a great place to manage fire, because when we did get lightning, 95% of the park is designated wilderness. There's a lot more wilderness in the Park Service than there is in Fish and Wildlife. And when we would be able to manage those fires as a natural disturbance mechanism within the ecosystem. So, and we had a lot of success over the years, and we've watched the times change. And really over the last 5 years here in the Olympics, we've had the largest fires in park history. And then I didn't mention that I was the interagency FMO before I left to go to the Fish and Wildlife. So I supported Olympic National Forest, the Park Service, and then Fish and Wildlife here in Western Washington. So I was kind of dueling there. But anyway, we have seen an increase in fire occurrence on the west side, in West Side forests. It's kind of funny to say, but right now there are actually fires burning on the Macaw Reservation and down out of Astoria, Oregon, and all along the coast, because we got into November and it started to rain. Everybody went out to burn all their slash piles, and then we got into 2 weeks of dry weather and now east winds, and so all those are kind of moving around. So I just mentioned that because that is one thing that I enjoy about the job, is adapting. And we've seen a lot of changes. I mean, in my 29-year career now, there's been a lot of changes, and year after year we're seeing additional changes. Fire seasons are getting longer, fire regimes are changing, and so we have to be adaptive. I like that challenge, and trying to be forward thinking, write fire management plans that are written not to deal with what we've seen in the past, but to deal with what we're going to see in the future. And I think we all need to be kind of programming ourselves in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to look back. Hindsight 2020, right? We keep on needing to tune our eyes into that next phase. What are things going to look like in the future? So a pair to that question is, what are some of the challenges that of working in this field?
Um, well, it's hard to implement our treatments projects at the scale that I think we need to be implementing them at to stay ahead of the power curve, if you will. And I think we've been losing this battle for a long time. And like back in the 90s when I was at Lassen and we were ramping up our prescribed burn program down there, we were burning 150 acre, 200 acre units. The largest one that we did was like 1,500 acre. And just a couple of years ago during the Dixie Fire, the Dixie Fire was almost 1 million acres. And it burned just about half of Lassen Volcanic National Park, a lot of my old stomping grounds. And also Crater Lake. I worked at Crater Lake for a while, and over the last 10 years, about 2/3 of Crater Lake is burned in wildfires. And it's just like some of my old friends that I worked with back in the 90s, I said, doesn't it make you wish that we were burning 10,000, 20,000 acres a year back in the 90s? And instead of waiting until we had all these changes within the fire environment that led to these mega fires that we're seeing now, and very impacted fire effects, real severe fire effects and stand replacement in areas that should have been burning at more frequently at lower intensities. So that's a huge challenge, and I don't know how we're going to get through that. I do like to say, to meet that challenge, we need to be using wildfire to manage wildfire, which is one of my focuses now, being in with the qualifications I have in terms of strategic operational planner and helping with decision support, managing long duration fires on the landscape and making those decisions when we're getting benefit. So that's a huge challenge. Planning paralysis. We land there a lot in the federal government, where it will take 5, 10, 15 years sometimes to get through a fire plan. And at Olympic, like I mentioned, I was working the last 8 years that I was there on a fire plan, and I wanted to finish that up. And then before I left, I couldn't, because we were just hamstrung. But anyway, everything was there. And unfortunately, our system, we get kind of spun around the axle with developing plans and the compliance portions of it and everything else. And I'm like, fires are going to happen. They're going to happen one way or the other. And if we can't get a good plan in place that we can use, we're just going to have to do what we need to do. And so that's, I think, very unfortunate. But there again, I think it is having folks coming up through the system that have that forward thinking and that background to come to the table and help with some of that planning. And what else? Another big challenge that we're all dealing with are organizational gaps. We're not seeing the new generation coming in to fire. And right now, almost every meeting that I'm on, whether it's regional or interagency, is everybody's talking about how few applicants and interest there is in terms of folks getting into fire. And that's a huge challenge, because we can't fill our crews. We can't fill the positions that we need to be implementing fuels treatments and prescribed fires. So that's one that we've really been spending a lot of time discussing on how to develop the new generation of fire managers. So there's a lot of other challenges, but those are some of the keys that I would think about.
If we want to address that one you just mentioned, we'll just keep those other ones a little bit. Just kidding. You're right. You're right. Getting this next generation in, and that's part of the reason that we have this class, is to help people become aware of the different opportunities that exist. Now I'm curious, this transition to parks to Fish and Wildlife Service, that must have been a huge move. What was, and you're not the only one to transition kind of mid career or end of career or whatever to a different agency. What was that like, and what were some of the thoughts that you had as you made that move?
Well, it was a tough decision because I've been with the Park Service for 28 years. I love the Park Service. I love managing fire in wilderness, and that's kind of was my specialty. But as I mentioned, for 5, almost 6 years, I was the interagency FMO, and so I call it triple dating between the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, and the Forest Service, and I was going to all the meetings, and it just provided me a really good opportunity to get a feel for the other agencies after being a Park Service employee for 28 years. And I enjoyed working for each of the agencies because I was Park Service funded, but a percentage of my time would go to each of the agencies. So I just was able to get a good feel and of the personalities, if you will, of each. And I was just ready for a change. I mean, being an FMO in an area, over the last, in 2015, we had a fire going in the Olympics for over 5 months. In 2016, we had a handful that went for 3 or 4 months. And there's just, I was ready to move on and just take on a different challenge. I loved it. It was a really hard decision to go away from the Park Service. I see a lot of the folks that I used to work with, and all the opportunities I had in the Park Service of going to, just gorgeous areas. And, I was working, of course, that's how I see the world as I go on fire assignments, the Hawaii volcanoes and the Grand Canyon and Glacier and Yosemite and Mesa Verde and all over the place. But Fish and Wildlife, I've been to Okefenokee. I've been all over the place too. Just this last spring, Panther and a lot of the refuges down in the southern area. But anyway, that I don't know. Sometimes you just have to. I've heard people, and I've talked to people who have moved around in their careers to different agencies, and they always say it helps understanding and seeing the differences. And we always used to joke around in our interagency fire program that we'd get the filter out the goods of each and run with those, and then because each one had its quirks, so we just always try to look at the bright side and go, well, let's do that over on the Park Service because we can, and well, the Forest Service doesn't allow this, and Fish and Wildlife is usually good for anything. So anyway, that's kind of how I made that decision. And I've this last year has been very challenging, especially with all the infrastructure funding in the bill. That's pretty much my life right now. And just learning, it provided me, I don't want to say I was stagnating, but I needed new challenges. So that's why I had this opportunity to come and work with Josh O'Connor and other folks, and I jumped on it.
Yeah, that's a good lesson to take away as well. It's that know yourself, know when you're being your strongest and if you're not, and what you can do to adjust that. All right, so this next question, I'm going to ask about your KSAs, but these are not the KSAs that you have normally been familiar with. I'm going to ask about your knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So I'd like to know about which knowledge, skills, and attitudes were most helpful for you as you, or let's see, would be most helpful for this generation to develop so they can be successful and happy working in fire and fuels. So we're going to start with knowledge. So you're thinking about the things that people should know to be successful in fire and fuels. What would you think that they should know? In fact, we'll go knowledge and skills. We'll tie those two together.
Okay. I think I can't say exactly what you need to know. You need to be willing to learn and have an open mind. I am a big fan of being a generalist, and so being curious and like I'll say, like, I started my career on a fire engine, and it was fun, but I was getting bored, and so I knew that I needed to get off that. So the knowledge and skills that I ended up building upon was the fire effects, installing fire effects monitoring plots, being a fire effects monitor out on burns, observing fire behavior, being a student of fire. And so that's stuff that you just have to kind of develop with time. In terms of what you're going to get from school, it is how to think critically and problem solve, I think. Writing, you definitely need to know how to be a technical writer and a good communicator. How to interpret what's going on and then communicate that in a way that the audience, and audiences will vary throughout your career. You need to identify that and then communicate it in a way that it will be effective. The one thing about the knowledge and skills in fire, and I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, the system is designed so you have to develop your operational qualifications. And because most of the positions in the federal government have certain requirements, qualification requirements in order to qualify for those positions, whether it's, a prescribed burn boss type 2 or incident commander type 3. Those are the higher levels. Once you get in, the starting gate, GS4, basically red card, education is good. GS5, you need to have S290 and incident commander type 5. And then from there, you just start building, and each step you'll be required to have certain qualifications. So I think that is important. But there again, I think it's important to balance the two, because I've seen so many people get diverted on the suppression operations track. And then I talk to them and I say, what do you want to be? What are your career goals? And they go, well, I want to be an FMO. And I go, well, so what are you doing to diversify your knowledge and skills so you can contribute as an FMO? And a lot of that gets back to the planning side and taking part. And I don't want to say doing some of the unfun stuff, but getting, not taking that engine assignment or the task force leader assignment because you want to get out on a fire assignment to make overtime, but take that detail to go work with a fire effects crew for a few weeks. Look for those opportunities. There are a lot of different positions in fire management, besides being a firefighter. And I've always said, we're not firefighters, we're fire managers, no matter where you are. But there's GIS is a huge skill that is very beneficial. And I will say that that's one thing that I wish I would have been strong on. I'm not a GIS person. But ecology, take a ecology course, fire ecology, or any other ecology courses. Those are critical knowledge and skills that you'll bring to the table if you're part of an interdisciplinary team and putting together, helping to put a research project or anything like that. So what else? I kind of jotted some stuff down.
So just as you're thinking about that, Coney also asked to have you touch on what are some of the hardest ones for you to learn, and what are the hardest knowledge and skills for you to teach?
Well, it's kind of funny. Fire is one of those things that the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And here I am going into my 29th year. And right now I feel like I've completely lost knowledge of what's going on. And part of that is because the game board is changing so fast. It's funny because what used to be normal 10, 15, 20 years ago is no longer normal. I don't think I've had any year in the last, well, maybe this last fire season, but over the last 5 to 10 years, so many years, it's just like, well, never seen that one before. And so I guess that, to always be a student of fire and keep an open mind, and don't never say never. Well, it will never do that. It's like, well, and I'm a fire analyst. And so we do a lot of fire modeling. And I remember it was about 10 years ago, I was on a long-term assessment team. And we were looking at this fire down on the Deschutes in Oregon. And the long-term assessment analyst had done some models, and they were like, this fire is not going over the crest of the Cascades. It's not going west. It's not going to get onto the Willamette. And I was the F band down there. And I was just kind of like, well, I don't know, looking at what it did yesterday, if it does it again today, it's going to be there. And so, but models are good, but you got to look out the window. You got to see what the fire's doing. And anymore, you have to give a correction factor. FS Pro, there's a kind of a saying going around that blue is the new red, because the high probability area where the fire is going to be. Lots of times we see it pushing into the blues, the much lower probability areas. And so I guess getting back to the whole question, what knowledge do you need to know? You need to know what you don't know, if you will. And things are changing, and the skill to adapt and understand those changes. We're going through that right now. I mean, with the prescribed fire escape in New Mexico last spring, and the Forest Service is going, their review came out last spring. I was down, we had a prescribed fire escape on one of our refuges down in California, and these extended droughts are changing the game. And people are going, well, we've always done ditch burning in the spring and we've never had problems. And it's like, well, maybe after 10 years of drought, now all the organics are starting to burn, and a week or two after you burn, you get winds, and then all of a sudden it's off and running again. Well, that shouldn't happen. Well, maybe it shouldn't, but it is. So how are we going to calibrate? And that's one of the things that we're talking about. We have a workshop coming up here in just a couple of weeks, regional workshop, and we're going to be talking about the changes going on and our ability to adapt to those changes and learn and adjust to be successful as we move forward. So
Awesome. So this next question feeds on that a little bit, except I want to hear about the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that you've developed in fire that then you found have served you in just your life, where you're thinking, boy, that time as an FMO, I can now deal with this grocery store clerk or whatever it is. What are the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that you feel like you've been able to take and use in your daily life?
This is a hard one because I couldn't even imagine what my life would be like if I hadn't been in fire for so long. I will say that and I don't mean to be discouraging about this, but life in fire isn't always easy. You go through hardships. It was the best of times and the worst of times. And, you go out on fire assignments and you end up sometimes in great places and sometimes in miserable places. And, you're sleeping in the dirt. You're not, you don't take a shower for sometimes weeks. You get into a little glacial fed stream just to try to wash up once in a while. But those are the times that I look back and I really am happy to have gone through those, because that old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And so, and also being out on fires, you're in a very stressful situation. Many times. Sometimes you get into the doldrums of mop up and everything else, but even those days teach you a lot about being just patient and methodical. It teaches you how to work with other people, and maybe some that you might not have the same thought process. So working through differences and talking it out and coming up with a plan that everybody can move forward with. What else? Perseverance. It's just that's probably one thing that, being in fire management, you just learn how to problem solve and keep pecking away at it. You take a big problem, something that looks completely undoable, and you break it apart into manageable pieces, and you start solving those pieces, and then next thing you know, you're putting those pieces together and you just solve the big problem. And that's helped me in my personal life, by taking on remodeling my house, tearing out walls, and figuring things out as I go. Like, oh, I didn't know that was there. And so anyway, a lot of those knowledge and skills that I've learned in fire are transitional. A lot of them are, help me in my leisure time, and like my understanding of weather and maybe where to get weather, because I like going fishing. And I live here on the Olympic Peninsula, and I go out into the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and it's a very dangerous body of water, and you have to watch the winds very closely. And so, my training and understanding of weather forecasts and products have probably saved my life a couple times with fishing. And then just good planning. I've, over the years, just developed really good planning skills. And that helps me in my personal life a lot. So am I missing a part of that?
Nope. Yep, you got him. Yeah. Yep. There's many instances where I'm like, boy, I'm sure glad I know how to do that. Like fire really taught me that one. Fuel really taught me that
It is. And, it's just like, it's funny because just a couple years ago, my son actually got into fire, and my wife and I were talking, and she didn't really want him to get into fire, and I kind of had some mixed feelings, and she said, well, I don't want him to get into fire because it's a hard life, and she said, if we were to go back, I wouldn't want you to be in fire. And I started thinking about it. I go, I love my career. I love everything that I've done with it. And I think we're going into a good place now with fire in terms of more work-life balance in those discussions. And not to get off this question, Heather, but watching him now, he's just finished up his second season. Watching him and what he's been going through, it's interesting because it takes me way back. And but I go back and I think about everything I've done and seen, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, to be honest with you. So,
and that we talk about this, right? Maybe I think about it a lot as well, is that life is hard. Like life's gonna be messy, and you're gonna be in uncomfortable places, and you're gonna be in danger sometimes when you didn't think you were. And I don't know. If I'm gonna choose my hardships, I just like the bonuses that come with this field. And there's gonna be some challenges no matter what you do. I call those type 2 fun. It's the type of fun where you're like, I wouldn't want to like choose that again, but it makes a good story.
it does. It does. And just the friendships and the camaraderie that you develop over fire experience and being out. And it's not just being out on fires, it's also implementing prescribed burns. It's a common goal for the team, and there's nothing better than finishing up a burn, and yeah, we did it, and because it takes a lot to plan and implement correctly and everything else. So yeah, no, it's fire has formed my life, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, the last question is, how do you recommend getting a job and being successful in a job with your agency? And that can be something where we can transition into this org chart showing that as well. But let's start off first with more of your general recommendations that you have for getting and being successful in a job in Fish and Wildlife Service or Park Service or whatever in general.
Apply. Go on USA Jobs and find those announcements and apply. And I know it's tough in today's world, but be willing to move. And because there's a lot of opportunities if you're willing to move. And I know it's hard, especially if there isn't housing available and this and that. But that will open up opportunities for you. I mentioned earlier that across the board, the number one challenge of the agencies is getting enough applicants and getting people who are interested and quality applicants. So, spend some time on your resume, make sure that it says who you are, what your interests are, and what you're capable of doing, and apply. And especially if you're interested in certain areas in the Fish and Wildlife at refuges or Park Service at certain parks, make sure you know those areas. So if you get a call, you don't go, now where's that? Because I remember a long time ago when I was down at Crater Lake, and and I was going through our certs, and I would call people who had applied, and they didn't even know where Crater Lake was. And that just kind of shows me, well, you're not really interested in this place. But and follow up your application. Call the contact number. Let them know that you're interested. Have a discussion with them. Ask some good questions. Let them know that you're interested in not only, swinging a tool and sitting on an engine, but, learning about fuels management and prescribed fire. Those kind of opportunities. I know that some of you are really early on in your career. Carlin, you said you just graduated high school, you just started college. Follow your interests. And just that's really important. Do what makes you happy. And in fire, like I said, there's a lot of different functional areas that you can get into. But yeah, have fun early on. Get your operational calls. There are some hiring events going on. I know that I think last week down in California, there were some hiring events for the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, BLM, and Forest Service. So maybe look for those. That was the first time I've ever heard of the ability for people to walk in with a resume and be hired on the spot. So, which is kind of a good change. And hopefully with the challenges we have with hiring now, we will open up some of those hiring authorities that way back long ago we got away from. And we used to be able to do student hire authorities, local hire authorities, emergency hires. But anyway, hopefully we're breaking some of those down. There are a lot of good opportunities coming open in apprentice positions, GS 3, 4, 5 positions. So you can get in as a 3 and work your way up. They usually have fire academies that you'd go to get training, and then you go and you get experience on an engine, a hand crew, heli-tac. We're in big discussions on incorporating prescribed fire and fuels in that. Anyway, there's some really good opportunities to start a career in fire. There's a new job series coming out, and there's a lot of focus on professionalizing the fire series, and because Nathan, did you say you're a forestry tech? People are like, why am I a forestry tech? I'm a firefighter, and all my life I was a forestry tech too. But it's kind of like, no, let's call it as it is. We're firefighters. If you're on a hotshot crew, you're not a forestry tech, you're a firefighter. If on an engine crew or a heli-tac crew or whatever. So I think that change in the job series is going to be beneficial. And there's just been so much talk about how to enhance the career development opportunities. Getting back to one of the challenges that I mentioned earlier in terms of the organizational gaps, and getting folks in that are interested. But anyway, I guess that's the best way to get in and I don't want to say pester, but like I said, call and talk to them. Get your name off that list. Because some of these certs might have. I don't want to say that we're struggling for applicants, but I mean we get 100, 200 names on a cert sometimes for a GS3. But if you call and you talk to them, that brings your name off that cert, and you usually get on a list. And they, I used to make notes and everything else. So.
Good. Well, I'm going to share my screen now and let's talk a little bit about the organization. of these organizations. So this is what Josh put together, and I had him put it down in terms of education, and it looks like he went from the bottom, or yeah, he started top is the entry level stuff. And so you mentioned that Fish and Wildlife Service is just a smaller organization, and Josh O'Connor, he is he has done his career in Fish and Wildlife Service. One thing that stood out to me when we were together at Turnbull last month is he said that he just feels like with Fish and Wildlife Service he was really able to get a huge spectrum of experiences. I mean, fire and fuels in general, I think we do a good job at really getting people a variety of things, but it does seem Fish and Wildlife Service specifically, you're just asked to do so much with wildlife and these ways that you got to be, being able to do all kinds of different skills. So, is there anything you can specifically speak to as far as progressing through Fish and Wildlife Service?
Well, this is the first time I've seen this flow chart, so this looks like a fairly standard progression, with the exception that there's that fire apprentice box, and that's new, and that's across not only Fish and Wildlife, but I know the Park Service has apprentice positions standing up, and we're seeing that as a way to try to get folks in and then develop them and give them a way to advance. And then I think at the end of it, then they get placed into a permanent position somewhere. But yeah, you could kind of see it. You start as there it is, the forestry technician, and then you go to a senior fire or apprentice position, and then engine, fuels tech.
How many years would you say it might take for someone to get to a fuels tech position?
As a 6-7, well, generally you need to have time and grade. So, a year at a 3 a GS4 you can get there with educational credits, as well as a 5. And then I can't remember what it is for a 6-7, but there again, we get back to those qualifications that are required for those positions. And it's, there's the stepping stones. You have to identify your stepping stones. So to get to a GS5, you need to have your S290 and your incident commander type 5. That will usually take at least 2 to 3 years in the Park Service or Fish and Wildlife, depending on what area you're in. If you're in an area that has a lot more fire activity, and you see a lot more fire, you might be able to get that. But there again, we talk a lot about experience. There's no substitution for experience in fire, and you can't watch a video. I mean, you have to live it, and you have to build those slides in your mind of, oh yeah, I remember I saw this on the Vantage fire, and so you need to build your foundation and get that experience. I know everybody is kind of in a rush, but take your time. As you move up, you also gain responsibility, and as a either an assistant engine captain, on the fuel side, you might have some supervisory responsibilities, either running a crew or something like that. And then you're starting to be responsible for other people's lives. and when you're out on fires, you're making decisions that could impact them. So you want to make sure that you've built that foundation and that you're ready to move on. And so let's see, a couple 3 years, let's just go 3 years to get to a GS5, or 3 seasons. And then a year as a 5, then you can start applying to a GS6, 7. And those multi-graded positions are great. We're starting to actually see more of those. Like I mentioned, the 3, 4, 5s. I think there's some 5, 6, 7s, but that's a way to get folks in and then develop them and then let them advance non-competitively.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and then one thing that we have been seeing over the last several years, a lot of these positions are getting upgraded. Like engine captains used to be all 7s, and now we're seeing a lot of 8s and even 9s in some areas. So, and with the new, I was going to say with the current series, like there's the 462 is the forestry technician series, and then the 401 is the professional series. The 401 actually has positive education requirements. So you have to have, I think originally it said a 4-year degree with at least 24 credits of natural sciences, but then
this one depends on which agency. The Forest Service interprets it as needing a 4-year degree, and the Department of Interior interprets it as needing to have 24 credits.
Yeah. And really different HR people. So yeah, that's where getting to those, like once you get into the 9s, you might start seeing that 401 series. And so that's where your education is going to come in. Now, I have heard that with the new fire series coming into play, that I think it's 456, that might not have that education requirement. So, so there could be some changes there. But definitely with what you're doing in terms of being in school and getting that foundation, whether it's required or not, like I mentioned earlier, it will benefit you as you move through your career. Mm-hmm. And then as you get, you just want to make sure that you don't plateau. I plateaued for a long time. Like I said, I was basically like a GS9 fuel specialist for 15 years. But I was able to grow during that time and then, was able to move up and, get into my position now. Sometimes, in the Fish and Wildlife and the Park Service, sometimes we're our own worst enemies. There was a rule that came out, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, where you couldn't have multi-graded positions if you're a supervisor. So like you couldn't have a 911 position or an 1112 or a 1213 for supervisory positions. And then in the Park Service, there were very few GS11s. So people would get to the GS9, and then most of the FMO positions were GS12s. So they would have to leave the Park Service to get the timing graded 11 if they wanted to come back in as a 12. Well, that's just shooting ourselves in the foot. So you should, have the stepping stones for career advancement within the same agency.
Yeah. Wow. Have they resolved that?
Well, we still can't have the multi-graded positions, and for whatever reason, if they're supervisory.
Yeah. For sure.
Non-supervisory, they can. So, but yeah, it, like everything else, we kind of sometimes make our own problems and then figure out how to solve them. And then I think we're getting there, but
yeah,
there again. And with, getting getting a job and moving up. I did mention, the ability to kind of move around a little bit to see different fuel types, different programs. It's important. It will expand diversify your skill set and experience. Because I found that I was at Lassen for 6 years, and I was wondering if I was stagnating being in the same program. And that's when I started to move. That was a combination between career opportunities and family life. And then, ended up landing where we wanted to land and where we raised our family. And that's why I didn't move, which probably hampered. That's probably why I was a field specialist for so long. I could have had other opportunities, but I didn't want to move. I like Port Angeles. So
Me too. All right. Any questions for Todd?
Hey, one other thing about is develop an individual development plan. And there's a form on that. I was actually back in 1999, I was able to get into a formal mentoring program with the Park Service. And one of the exercises that we did was developing an IDP, and it really makes you think, like, where do you want to be short term, mid term, and long term, and then you identify your stepping stones and how to get there. And so for some of you, that could incorporate your college, what courses you want to take, what major or minors, but also summer employment. If you could start getting some, experience under your belt during the summer, not only to, as a summer job, but if you're interested in a career, that, it would just combine with your education and get you that much closer once you get out. So I do encourage you to be thinking about that. And then you use that flow chart that Heather had up there. There's also, Heather, you probably know this chart. I think it's on the, it shows what qualifications you need to go to advance, and it gets you all the way up to IC2 and 1. And that will give you kind of an idea of the stepping stones in terms of qualifications.
Yeah, it's actually up on that same site for, yeah, it's on, I've a copy of that as well on here. It's got the organization for the different structures, and then we've got all the fire line.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep. And I shared a link in the chat to the self-development plan for NWCG. So
Awesome.
I have my class that I teach in the spring go through that, and they, do level 1 self-development plan.
Great. Well, good to hear.
Yeah.
So.
Other questions? Go ahead, Nicole.
So, in your opinion, Todd, is it almost easier to move within U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or is it kind of easy to bounce back and forth between a bunch of different agencies? Because Kim on Wednesday, she seemed like she worked everywhere with everybody. But I was just wondering on your, if you think that there might matter to stay in U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
Well, I guess it just depends where you are. Fish and Wildlife is a pretty small organization, which is a good thing, because then that means that you get to do a lot of different things, and you're basically always busy. And in your, at refuges, there, the fire crew is always out helping with something. And then the other folks, collateral duty, come and help with fires. Like I mentioned earlier, I was lucky enough to get at Lassen to be in a program that was kind of growing, and it provided me an opportunity to advance. I think if you're in an area that, you know, and you're there for a couple, 3 years, and you're going to know whether you're going to have an opportunity to advance.
Yeah,
and it's like, well, you know, I'm not seeing an opportunity because the assistant engine captain and the engine captain have been here for 10 or 15 years, and they're not leaving. And so then it's like, no, I need to move on. And which isn't a bad thing, because you will get, it's good to see how different programs operate, and different crews, and especially early on in your crew. I really do encourage you to get that experience on a hand crew and an engine. And if it's, you know, helitac, if it interests you, helitac is.
I went on my first helicopter ride this summer on the base. It was actually my first time ever flying in my life. I loved it. So I'm not opposed. So
I've spent a lot of time sitting at a heli base. So I get antsy. But yeah, and then just look for those other opportunities. You know, if it's a program that it's all running and gunning initial attack, and they don't do many prescribed burns or fuel treatments, and that's what you're interested in, is like, look for a program that does more of that. Go look at opportunities to go to the southern area, because burning is a way of life down there. I mean, every day is a burn day. And if you really want to get some prescribed burning experience, I went down there with the Prescribed Fire Training Center back in 2000, 2001, and had a blast. It's a lot different than burning out west, but yeah, you see a lot, you learn a lot. So did I answer your question at all?
yeah, I think so. Because I've worked with Cape Cod National Seashore with their prescribed burn program, and I was kind of told, like, to stay in MPS, if that's what you want to do, you need to stay in it and just like grind it out. But I'm kind of glad you were saying, like, if it's not working, just don't be scared to jump ship to another agency even. So
yeah, and don't. And you know, it's all about whether you see a path, a career development path within that program that you're at.
Yeah.
And I'm not real familiar with the Cape Cod organization out there.
It's a fun time. I work on the military base now, but it's Pine Barrens. It's different, and yeah, like it a lot.
Yeah. It doesn't mean you can't apply to some fish and wildlife units. Maritime is a good one.
For your retirement, that means federal service, right? So does the retirement that you had from your work, does that just continue to accrue with other federal agencies?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. You do want to, as you move forward, you want to be careful not to have a break in service if you're primary and then going into a secondary. Now that's getting more into the personnel HR side. And as you go that, once you get into your, like, past a GS7, like going to a GS7 to a GS9, yeah, look into that and ask those questions. And the good thing is now is that most of the position descriptions are all certified. So back in the 90s, there were some hokey position descriptions going around that said they were covered, but we found out later they actually weren't. I found that out personally.
Oh, ouch.
But work through that problem.
Yeah.
Took it down into manageable pieces and solved it.
Good. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Todd, for your time. Appreciate it today. You know, I'll be sharing, people can reach out to me and I can share your contact information if they've got some additional questions. And yeah, appreciate, again, taking the time to chat with us today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, and I hope all of you find fulfilling careers in fire management.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.
All right. Have a
Take
good day,
care.
everyone.
Bye.